The animal that beats your dog on cognitive tests remembers individual human faces and figures out video games with its snout spends most of its adult life unable to turn around. That's not an exaggeration for effect. It's the literal physical reality for millions of breeding pigs alive on this planet right now. And it sits directly next to a growing body of research showing that pigs are one of the more cognitively sophisticated animals humans have ever domesticated. Those two facts exist at the same time, about the same species, and most people who eat pork on a regular basis have never had to hold them in their head together. By the end of this video, you'll actually know what a pig is, where it came from, how smart the research says it genuinely is, the myths about this animal that get repeated constantly and are simply wrong, and what modern industrial pig farming actually looks like, described plainly, with real numbers, not for shock value, but because most people have simply never been shown it. Let's start with what a pig actually is, biologically, because the domestic pig story starts a lot earlier and in more places than most people assume. The domestic pig, Sus scroffa domesticus, descends from the wild boar, and genetic and archaeological evidence points to at least 2, possibly 3, separate and independent domestication events. One happened in the Fertile Crescent, in what's now the Middle East, somewhere between roughly 10 and 15,000 years ago. A second, entirely unconnected event happened in China, around 8,000 years ago, and a third likely occurred later still, when Near Eastern domestic pigs were brought into Europe by early farmers and interbred with local European wild boar, producing a genetically distinct European lineage. 3 different human populations, on 3 different land masses, independently looked at the same aggressive tusked forest animal, and separately decided it was worth taming. Here's the part that's genuinely a little strange about it. Wild boars weren't really hunted into domestication so much as they wandered into it themselves. As early human settlements started piling up food waste and scraps, boars, opportunistic omnivores that they are, started scavenging closer and closer to people. The individual boars that tolerated humans best, rather than fleeing or attacking, got to stick around and eat easier meals, and over enough generations that tolerance compounded into something closer to partnership. Researchers studying ancient pig remains have even found something that measures this shift directly. As the relationship deepened, domesticated pig brains actually shrank relative to their wild ancestors, by something on the order of 1/5, a pattern seen across multiple domesticated species, generally explained by the fact that an animal no longer needing constant vigilance against predators and threats doesn't need to spend the metabolic cost of maintaining as much brain tissue for it. Structurally, pigs belong to a group of hoofed mammals, whose closest surviving relatives, somewhat improbably, are hippopotamuses. Hardly obvious cousins at a glance, but the fossil and genetic record backs it up. Pigs are omnivores. They're highly social, and unlike most large domesticated animals, they never really took to the nomadic, herding lifestyle that turned sheep and goats and cattle into animals humans could walk alongside across continents for millennia. Pigs stayed close to settlements. That difference in temperament and lifestyle is a big part of why domestic pigs, more than nearly any other major livestock species, ended up living almost entirely within human-built structures rather than open pasture. A detail that matters a lot more once you get to the second half of this video. Before we even get to how smart pigs are mentally, it's worth pointing out how good their senses are physically, because it sets up just how much information a pig is actually processing at any given moment. A pig's sense of smell is genuinely extraordinary, sensitive enough that pigs have been used for centuries in parts of Europe specifically to hunt truffles, sniffing out a fungus buried several inches underground, through soil, with no visible surface trace at all. That same nose is doing an enormous amount of the cognitive legwork behind the individual recognition abilities you're about to hear about. A pig isn't just looking at you, it's building a detailed scent profile of you at the same time, which is part of why pigs can tell familiar people apart so reliably, even at a distance or in poor light. Now the part that actually surprises people: how smart this animal is. Researchers studying pig cognition have found that pigs can learn to manipulate a joystick with their snout to move a cursor toward an on-screen target, a task first demonstrated at Penn State, and one that requires understanding an entirely abstract relationship between a physical motion and a symbol moving on a screen. In controlled comparisons, pigs have outperformed dogs at it. Pigs demonstrate long-term spatial memory, sharp enough to navigate complex mazes and recall food locations well after the fact, along with what researchers describe as episodic-like memory, the ability to remember not just where something happened, but roughly when. They show robust social learning, meaning a pig can watch another pig solve a problem and use that observation to solve the same problem faster itself, identifying the most productive food source or the correct solution to a novel puzzle purely by watching a neighbor figure it out first. Pigs can also distinguish and remember individual humans, including telling apart two people dressed identically, using a combination of facial recognition, scent, and hearing. And when researchers give pigs a genuinely unsolvable task, pigs generally don't turn to a nearby human for help, the way dogs reliably do. They keep trying to solve it themselves, a behavior researchers read as a sign of strong, independent, non-social problem solving, rather than the highly social, human-oriented intelligence dogs evolved for over thousands of years of selective breeding, specifically for cooperation with us. On several of these measures, researchers have placed pig cognitive performance in roughly the same range as a 3-year-old human child. Here's a misconception worth correcting directly, because you'll see it stated online as settled fact constantly, usually with a lot of confidence, that pigs pass the mirror test and recognize themselves in a mirror the same definitive way chimpanzees, dolphins, elephants, and magpies do. What the actual research shows is a little more careful than that. Pigs reliably use a mirror as a tool. Shown food that's only visible through a mirror's reflection, they figure out the trick within minutes and go find the real food directly, which is genuinely impressive abstract reasoning. And pigs also show what researchers call contingency checking, testing whether the reflection moves exactly the way they move. But full mirror self-recognition, the kind confirmed with a mark test, placing an unfelt mark somewhere on an animal's body it can only see in a reflection, and watching it reach for the mark on its own body rather than at the mirror, hasn't been conclusively demonstrated in pigs the way it has in that smaller, more exclusive club of species. Researchers who've run these studies describe the early results as intriguing rather than conclusive, and say more rigorous follow-up testing is still needed before pigs could be added to that list with confidence. It's a case where the real current science is already impressive enough without rounding it up to something the data doesn't fully support yet. Second misconception, and this one's been baked directly into the English language. Pigs are not dirty animals, and they don't sweat like a pig. Pigs have almost no functional sweat glands anywhere on their bodies. They are, in a very literal sense, one of the only common farm animals that basically cannot sweat, which means they have no reliable way to cool themselves through evaporation the way humans or horses do. Wallowing in mud isn't a hygiene failure, it's the workaround. A layer of mud on skin evaporates far more slowly than plain water would, giving pigs hours of cooling relief instead of minutes, while also doubling as sunscreen and a barrier against biting insects. The idiom got the entire mechanism exactly backward. Pigs cake themselves in mud, specifically because they can't do the thing the insult accuses them of doing. One more assumption worth flagging before this video changes direction, that a pig is one single, uniform thing. In reality, there are dozens of recognized pig breeds worldwide, ranging from small, slow-growing heritage breeds kept largely for flavor and hardiness, to a handful of highly specific commercial crossbreeds, typically some combination of large white, landrace, and Duroc genetics, bred over decades specifically to convert feed into muscle as fast and as efficiently as biologically possible. The animal you're picturing on a small family farm, and the animal actually producing the overwhelming majority of pork sold in supermarkets, are, genetically and behaviorally, not quite the same thing anymore. This is one of the more cognitively complex animals living on any farm on the planet, remembered as dirty by an idiom that's biologically backward, and reshaped by selective breeding into something its own wild ancestors wouldn't fully recognize. The smarter this animal turns out to be under careful scientific study, the harder its actual reality becomes to look away from. If it's genuinely surprising that an animal this intelligent gets casually summarized in pop culture as dumb and dirty, hit that like button. It really helps a video like this reach the people who'd want that correction too. Because the next part of this video is the part most people have simply never been shown. In the wild, and even in a backyard or sanctuary setting today, a pig's natural lifespan runs somewhere between 12 and 15 years, with some individuals documented living past 20. That's a genuinely long-lived animal. Closer to a dog's lifespan than most people would guess, and nowhere close to what commercial production actually allows for. In commercial pork production, a pig raised for meat, what the industry calls a market hog, reaches slaughter weight, typically somewhere around 250 to 280 pounds, in about 22 to 26 weeks, 5.5 to 6.5 months. Not years, months. That speed isn't incidental. It's the direct engineered result of generations of selective breeding, specifically optimized for rapid muscle growth and feed efficiency. Breeding a modern market pig into an animal that hits full slaughter weight in a small fraction of the time its own underlying biology would otherwise take to simply finish maturing. In the United States alone, more than 129 million pigs are slaughtered every year on that same compressed timeline. Breeding sows, the female pigs kept specifically to produce those piglets, live longer than that, but not by nearly as much as their biology would allow. A sow is bred repeatedly, cycling through roughly 4-month pregnancies with barely any recovery time between them, commonly producing more than 20 piglets a year across multiple litters, until her body simply can't sustain the pace anymore. At that point she's slaughtered, commonly somewhere in the range of 2 to 4 years old, depending on the operation. The exact spent sow slaughter age varies meaningfully by source and by farm, generally cited between roughly 1.5 and 5 years. Compare that to the 12 to 20 year lifespan the same animal is biologically built for, and the gap is the entire point of this video's title. During those repeated pregnancies, in a large share of commercial operations, sows are housed in what's called a gestation crate, a metal stall commonly around 2 feet wide and 7 feet long. That's barely larger than the sow's own body. It's specifically sized so she can stand up and lie down, and functionally too narrow for her to turn around at all for essentially her entire pregnancy. Most sows in these systems are also artificially inseminated, rather than allowed to mate naturally, a standard practice efficient enough that semen from a single boar can be used to impregnate 30 or 40 different sows. Shortly before giving birth, a sow is typically moved into a similarly restrictive farrowing crate, slightly modified with a lower rail, so piglets can nurse from the side while she remains otherwise confined, and stays there through weaning, which in commercial systems is often cut short to around 3 to 4 weeks, compared to the 2 to 3 months piglets would naturally spend nursing and learning from their mother in a less confined setting. After weaning, she's re-impregnated and returned to the gestation crate, and the entire cycle repeats. Piglets born into this system go through a handful of routine procedures within their first few days of life, almost always without anesthetic. Tails are docked short to reduce injuries from tail biting, a stress behavior that becomes more common in crowded indoor conditions than it is in more spacious settings. The tips of needle teeth are clipped or ground down for the same reason, and male piglets not being kept for breeding are castrated, again typically without pain relief. Each of these procedures exists to manage a specific documented problem that shows up more frequently at high stocking densities. They're responses to the conditions of confinement, not arbitrary cruelty for its own sake, which is an important distinction, but it also means the conditions themselves are doing a lot of the explanatory work here. Housing that many animals that closely together also raises the baseline risk of disease spreading fast through a herd, which is part of why antibiotic use has historically been routine in much of the industry, not just to treat sick animals, but to help offset the health costs of the system itself, a practice that's also been increasingly restricted and regulated in recent years in the US, the EU, and elsewhere, partly out of concern over antibiotic resistance in humans. This isn't a fringe practice limited to a handful of poorly run operations. For years, it was the standard dominant housing system across the majority of large-scale pork production in the United States, and it remains widespread in plenty of countries today. It's also worth being precise that the picture isn't static or uniform everywhere. The European Union has restricted gestation crate use for most of a pregnancy since 2013, and a number of individual US states, including California and Massachusetts, through statewide ballot measures, have passed their own laws requiring significantly more space for breeding sows. This is an area of real, ongoing regulatory change and active public debate, not a single fixed practice applied identically everywhere on Earth, and it's genuinely being contested in courts and legislatures as this video is being made. Sit with the two halves of this video side by side for a second. This is an animal capable of abstract problem solving that outperforms a dog's, with memory and social learning research as compared to a 3-year-old child's. And it's also an animal that, in a large share of the system producing the pork on supermarket shelves, spends most of its productive adult life in a space too narrow to turn around in, on a compressed biological timeline that has almost nothing to do with how long that animal was actually built to live. The smarter this animal turns out to be under careful scientific study, the harder its actual reality becomes to look away from. If you didn't know the actual numbers behind any of this, the lifespan gap, the crate dimensions, how compressed a market pig's life really is, or how recently some of the relevant laws have even changed, hit subscribe, drop a like, and let me know in the comments whether any single fact in this one changed how you think about something you genuinely never questioned before. I read everyone. One last thing, and it's a strange, almost hopeful footnote to close on. Pig heart valves are already inside human bodies, right now, keeping people alive. Because pig heart valves are structurally close enough to human ones, they've been used for decades in replacement heart valve surgery, chemically treated and implanted directly into human patients, an established mainstream medical procedure, not an experimental one. Pig skin has a similarly long history in burn treatment, used as a temporary biological dressing because its structure is close enough to human skin to support healing, while a patient's own skin grafts are prepared. More recently, researchers have gone even further, genetically modifying pig organs to be more compatible with the human immune system, and in a small number of pioneering cases, have successfully transplanted entire genetically modified pig hearts and kidneys into human patients in early clinical trials. Part of an active research field called xenotransplantation, aimed squarely at solving the chronic global shortage of human donor organs. Xenotransplantation trial outcomes, patient survival data, and regulatory status are an active, rapidly changing research area. The same animal at the center of this video's darkest numbers is, right now, quietly becoming one of the more promising answers to one of modern medicine's biggest unsolved problems, which might be the strangest fact in this entire video. The species we've engineered the hardest to disappear. The fastest is also, increasingly, the species medicine is counting on to help humans live longer.